So hi everybody, this is Mary Long here with Plein Painters Chicago in our virtual paint out and critique. I am absolutely thrilled to have Bob Krajecki with us today. I have to tell you that for myself, I painted for 2 years, taking many workshops, all different kinds of things, and then realized I need to go back really to basics and all the things I ever missed. And I signed up for the palette and chisels fundamentals class, and it changed my life. And I'd say it was Bob that really helped me just change my painting dramatically. So Bob, I owe you so much, and just am so thrilled that while you don't do a lot of plein air painting, we got you out once. But we are really glad you're here because of all your knowledge. And so I am very happy to share you with everyone else who hasn't met you before. So I know that Judy is around somewhere. Judy Krajecki is around your technical help, but there she is. Hi, Judy.
The boss of the house.
Boss of the house, good. Judy is also an artist. But Bob, tell us a little bit about your background as an artist.
To keep it short, I was interested in art in high school. After I graduated, I signed up for the famous artist correspondence course. It was a very good course. I got about a third of the way through. It was a 3-year course. I got through about a year, and then they wanted me to protect the country from communism, so I got drafted. I spent 2 years in the Army Air Corps. I got out of the service. I decided to go to art school. I went to the American Academy of Art. Spent 2 years at the academy. Then I transferred to the Chicago Academy of Art. A year there. Graduated. Did some freelance work. About a year later, I was hired to teach at the American Academy of Art. I was there for 28 years teaching the fundamentals of a drawing and painting class, illustration, watercolor, cartooning. I did a lot of different classes. Retired in 2000, and now I'm teaching classes out here where I live in Caneville. I teach a watercolor class every Friday. I've been teaching at the Palette and Chisel Academy downtown for about 10 years now. Actually, I was asked to teach there by, I think, Nancy Mertz, who should be on with us. Thank you for that. And that's where I'm at now.
Bob, as we're getting started here, let me just say a couple things to people. That Nancy Mertz is next week. She's going to be our critic next week, or as some people say, our critiquer. And so she'll be a part of that. If you have any questions, please put them in chat. I will try to follow those. And mostly what we're hearing is, or right now we're just hearing that there's hearing issues. And but please put your questions in there, and refrain actually from making other comments, because it's really hard for me to follow up on all the questions. And that's that. So, and Bob, how are you going to be doing your critique today?
Well, when you first asked me to do the critique, artists are visual people. So, just talking about artwork and pointing out things that are that could be improved or changed a little bit is valuable, but I think it's more valuable if you could see it. So what I suggested was to choose several of the paintings that would show what I feel are the most important things about painting. And that's drawing is always number one. Number two is form, shape and form. And the third thing is composition. How do you arrange your composition? Now, that might be a little bit of a problem in plein air because you can't be moving things around. But if you took something in a studio, artists can do anything. I can move buildings, I can move trees, and that can make for better composition. After composition, then it's color. and that's what I chose to really talk about. So if we had time, I can critique other paintings, but I thought it would be better just to be able to show you what I'm talking about instead of just talking.
All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So everybody, please check, make sure you're muted. Um, and if you would, and Bob, you go ahead and share screen
Share screen.
at the
Okay.
bottom. Yep, it's at the bottom and the green button. And if
Okay. I use the computer, but I'm not familiar with this whole process.
What's
Okay.
your first one?
yeah,
Number one.
Oh, what is that?
That's number one.
Oh, there we go.
Can you all see that?
yep, looks really good. We can't see the whole thing, but I know you can move it, do each part of it if you'd like, however you'd like to do it.
Yeah, I'll make it a little bit bigger.
Bob, I can't believe you're doing my piece of art.
Yeah. I saw it on your email and I thought I have to.
Oh my God, I'm so honored. Look, they're doing my art.
After I critique it, though. So the first thing I want to talk about is just when you start a painting, the first thing you have to know, no matter if you're doing it plein air or in the studio, you have to know exactly where your light source is. The light source is going to give you the light side of an object, the dark side of the object, and everything else in between. At the bottom, I have a little diagram here that shows if you're trying to paint realistically, everything that you paint, no matter what, has to have highlight. That's where the light is hitting the object the strongest. After the light, you have, in this example, I have a cylinder. It's going to gradually turn away from the light and get slightly darker to the shadow side of the object. Now, there's a little controversy. A lot of artists talk about half lights and half shadows. I kind of don't like that term because it describes something in between the light and the shadow. If you shade it from light to shadow gradually, it happens automatic. So you really don't have to think about it that much. After the shadow, then you have reflected light, and you always have reflected light. Light that reflects off of other objects onto the shadow side is going to make that lighter. The amount, how much it gets lighter is dependent on what's reflecting the light. If there's an object that's very reflective, then you're going to have a greater amount of reflected light. If it's not as reflective, a black object naturally is not going to reflect as much light, so the reflected light is going to be a little bit darker. After the reflected light, you have the cast shadow. The cast shadow is always, cast shadows are really helpful in creating shape and form. Cast shadow is always darkest where it starts, and it gradually gets lighter as it goes away from the object casting the shadow. Cast shadows are always transparent, so you can always see through the cast shadow to the color and the value and the texture that's underneath the cast shadow. Very common mistake is to make cast shadows black, too dark, and it doesn't look like a cast shadow. So again, once you understand that that's what you have to do, then the rest of it's easy. All you have to do is pay attention to the light source. Now, Deborah's painting, very nice painting, good perspective on there, good, nice tree. The sky in a landscape painting, the sky is the key to the whole painting because that's where the light's coming through. Now, I hope all of you have read Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. I've read it cover to cover 4 or 5 times. I think most of the students I recommend that book to tend to fall asleep after reading 2 pages or 3 pages. So the value of Carlson's Guide is to read it in small increments and take notes and try to figure out what he was trying to say. Great artist, not a great writer. So in Deborah's painting, you can see a light side of this building here and the shadow side. You can also see on the tree a light side. So that determines not only where the light's coming from, what the temperature of the light is. So if you have a warm light, then you're going to have cooler shadows, which is shown in the tree. So the tree is very nice. However, when we get to this lower building here, you have a dark on this side, which is on the light side. That should be light, and this side should be a little bit darker. So I adjusted that in the adjusted image here to show the light side and the darker side of the object. And that, again, it gives it more reality and more shape and form if you're consistent with the light source. So that's it as far as shape and form is concerned. Do we go to the next one if I can find it? Okay, second one, number 2.
No, that's good. I had them in order.
Okay, I'm looking for number 2 here.
You can close one. There's 2.
Which one is it, Bob?
There we go. I got it.
All right, I do have backups for you if you need it.
I've got them all here. It's just a matter of 42 images on one small computer.
Okay,
Can everybody see them?
Okay, can we see that one?
not yet.
Uh-oh. I've got it open.
Does he have to go out and come back in again?
You gotta, yeah. You should just be opening and closing there. I mean, starting share and
Okay,
closing share.
stop share,
And then share screen
share screen,
and go for 2. Go for 2. There's 2.
and there's number 2.
There you go.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay.
And I think that's Dina. Dina, is that yours?
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Okay, this one, there's a lot of things to talk about in this one. Again, overall, it's a good painting. I think it has a lot of really good elements in it. So next to the original painting here, what I do in Photoshop is they have a little filter that you can change the image into just black and white. You can do it in 3 steps or 4 or 5 or whatever. And that basically gives you the pattern of the painting. And I think pattern is one of the key elements of any painting, no matter what kind of painting it is. And the pattern is basically the areas of light, middle, and dark value. And what you're trying to do with the pattern is to get those 3 separate valued areas. First of all, you want them to have some variety. You want areas of light and dark and middle values to have a different size. So here in the original painting, you can see the light in the clouds at the top and a little bit of light in the foreground. And you got the dark pattern over to the left and the middle for the rest of it. So it has a good variety of shapes and sizes for the pattern. So that's the key. Once you have that, the adjusted image I have down here, I changed some of the values, the color and the temperature, and created a pattern in relationship to how I adjusted it. And you can see here that there's less lights in the foreground, so I have a simpler middle value in here. And then this dark here in the original is kind of isolated. So you want the values to connect to one another. So the adjustments I made were to just add a little bit of dark value in the bottom left-hand corner. And that you can see gives you a connection from the front to the middle ground and a little bit darker value at the top. So it creates good movement in the pattern and good connectivity. The second thing I want to talk about is just basically aerial perspective. Aerial perspective is the other than linear perspective, which we'll talk about later, is the effect of atmosphere on the objects that you're painting. The air, which is a blue molecule, water that forms around minute dust particles in the atmosphere that change depending on how far you look into it. So in the distance back in here, these trees, you're looking through more blue air, and the color then should be a little bit bluer. So I did that in the adjusted image here. You can see the difference. It gives you much more depth in the painting. Making it too intense and a little bit too dark here brings it forward, so you lose a lot of depth. If you want less depth, then you make it less blue. So all of the values and the colors that I put in here are all grayed down and lighter in value to show the effect of the atmosphere. The same thing in the sky. If you look at the original image, the sky is just basically blue. You have a little bit more intense blue at the top, which is good. You have to think, again, when you're painting, it's all an illusion. You're painting 3 dimensions on a flat 2-dimensional surface. And when you do that, you have to make it look 3-dimensional, there's certain things you have to do. For instance, the sky, it's not flat. It has dimensions. It's basically an inverted sphere. So the top part of the sky is actually a sky that's closer to you. It's overhead. And the back part of the sky is farther away. And so it has to give you that illusion on the 2-dimensional surface. You have to make the sky darker at the top, which isn't the top. It's basically the foreground. And gradually get lighter towards the horizon. Also has to be a little bit warmer. Warm colors come forward, cool colors recede. So to make it look like it's coming forward, you have to change the temperature from warm to cool into the background. And last thing is the intensity. Intense colors come forward, gray colors recede. So making the sky a little bit more intense in the foreground and grayer in the background. So I did that in the sky, the adjusted one. You can see that it's a little bit warmer and a little bit more intense at the top. And I added a cooler color, a little bit of cerulean blue to cool it down into the background. The other thing is the light source. In the painting you have here, it might have been an overcast day, and an overcast day, the light, because there's so much moisture in the air, the light is diffused. The light hits all of that water molecules and dirt in the atmosphere and reflects in all directions. So you have more cool colors. If you have a warm light, like I have in the adjusted image, then the clouds, which are basically the local color, that's the color of the object without influence of a light source, is white. So that white has to then be influenced by the warm light that's hitting it. So I added some yellow to the clouds up here and a little bit more yellow to the clouds in the foreground to bring it forward, and less yellow in the background to keep them in the distance. Also in this dark mass that's pretty green here, I made that a little bit warmer in here. So if you have a warm light, you have cool shadows. In the shadow side, I made this a little bit warmer to connect it more with the yellows that you have in the ground. Last thing is the ground. Again, the illusion on a 2-dimensional surface, to make something look flat on a 2-dimensional surface, to change the value from the foreground to the background, it has to change. Most of the time it's going to change because it's reflecting the sky. It's going to reflect the sky in the foreground. So it's going to be darker in the foreground and gradually get lighter towards the distance. The amount that you change is also critical. If you change it too much, that horizontal plane is going to look like it's going uphill. If you don't change it enough, it's going to look like a vertical plane. And this, again, I think the most important chapter in Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting is chapter 4. He calls it the angle and plane theory, which basically isn't a theory, it's an actual scientific fact. If you have light coming from above, that light is going to strike any horizontal plane more directly than any other plane. Any slanted plane or inclined plane, it will hit a little bit less, and therefore any inclined plane, like some of the edges on the trees here, are going to be a little bit darker in value. The last thing is any vertical plane. Any vertical plane with the light coming from above is going to not strike that surface, and that's going to be your darkest plane. So the relationship of those horizontal, inclined, and vertical planes is critical in making any painting look correct, like it's real. The only thing you have to be careful with is that life would be so easy if everything was the same. However, it never is. So it all depends also, you have to compensate for the local value of the object. So if you have an object, say you have a horizontal plane that's black, and you have a inclined plane, a slanted plane like a hill or a mountain, that's white. So in that case, the horizontal plane cannot be lighter than the inclined plane. So you always have to adjust it depending on the local value of the object that you're trying to paint. That makes life for artists much more complicated. What I usually recommend to the students is that generally the planes are going to change about 20%. So if I have light from above hitting a horizontal plane that's black, it's going to be 20% lighter in value. Okay. If I have a white object, it's going to change 20% also. So if that's not an absolute, but in general, that'll help you make decisions on how much value change is going to be in each of the planes.
So Bob, can you give us one more example of that in terms of the percentages, in terms of I don't know, back to front, is that or front to back rather, or where the value changes, how much to think about?
Mm-hmm. I'll think of an example of that. So if I had, it gets more complicated. I always have hard time answering questions briefly, but again, if you have a horizontal plane that's a middle value, so you have a value 40, black being 100 and white being 0. If you have a plane, a horizontal plane that's 40 and you have light coming from above, it's going to go to a value of approximately a 20. So if that was a black plane, a value of 100, with light coming from above, it's going to change approximately 20% to a value of 80. To make it even more complicated, you have to think about what is that plane that you're trying to paint made out of. So there's 3 factors that you have to consider as far as the material that you're playing. Any object can be either hard or soft. It could be shiny or dull. It could be smooth or textured. So on one extreme, you have a hard, smooth, shiny object. So if you're trying to show something that's hard, smooth, and shiny, then to change a bit, that 20% goes to about 60 or 80%. If on the opposite scale, if you have an object that is soft, it's textured and dull, like these objects in most landscapes, it could change less than 20%. Painting is hard. There's so many different factors you have to think about. You know, here in the foreground or the horizontal plane, you have some textured objects. The clouds are very soft. So the amount that the clouds change in relationship to the light source is going to be less than what the horizontal textured grassy plains are going to change.
Mhm.
So that explains it perfectly. Okay.
Thank you. I like your changes, by the way.
Oh,
And Bob, one other question related to that. So if you were out in the field about to paint Dina's scene here, where would you look to begin with identifying what your first, do you start with the sky, as you said, and then make all your value selections from that point? Or would you start with, you know, where do you start then?
where do I start? It depends on what medium I'm working in. In watercolor, I paint mostly in watercolor, sometimes in oils, wash, some acrylic. So it depends on the medium. With oil paint, you want to paint dark to light. So you'd want to start out with your darker values. Um, the important part, you know, you never start in one, there's no absolute rule in where you start. What you want to do initially is this. You want to establish that paint, that pattern. So if I can put in some of these dark values, and in oils, I would work very thin. I tend to work not similar to Richard Smith, not like him. He's much better than I am. But a light wash of the dark values, then the middle values, then a light values. If I can establish that very quickly, especially in plein air, then I can start anywhere from that point. Usually, again, dark to light.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm stopping sharing.
Share screen.
I'm going to share screen, and number three is movement.
Share. Uh-oh, where'd it go? Oh, it got
Kuhn. This is Kuhn Hongs.
I'm trying to find it here.
It's up.
It's
It's
up?
up?
Well, it was. Yep. Go back. You were doing the right thing.
We can't see it.
We see it, and I see your fixed one, your adjusted one. So you need to scroll down or scroll up to see the original.
Okay,
Here it is.
there
Or
it is.
maybe.
Yep. That your cursor. There you go.
Okay,
Excellent. Okay, you're there.
we got it on screen here?
Yep.
Okay, this one, a little bit of a composition situation. You know, how do you compose the elements within the picture space? One of the things that you want to do is to create a center of interest, something in the painting. Usually it's not an object, it's an area within the painting that is more important than any other object. So once you decide what the center of interest is going to be, then you want to move the viewer to the rest of the picture space in an interesting manner. What the heck does that mean? It means that you want the viewer to see your whole painting, and you don't want them to leave your painting and go look at somebody else's painting. So you have to be very, very careful, first of all, of the four corners of your picture space, because those four corners are like arrows pointing out of the picture space. So that's always a real concern whenever you're composing something. Then you want to change the speed at which the viewer goes. You want them to go to the center of interest. And here, I think this figure here is the center of interest. From there, then, you want to lead the viewer to the rest of the picture space. Some cases you want to go very quickly if there's nothing really interesting in that area. And other times you want to go rather slowly so that the viewer can enjoy what you're trying to show them in a more leisurely manner. And there's several different ways that artists use to control the movement within the painting and the speed of the movement in the painting. The first one is line. Line is the most common one. So if you have things lined up in a row, they will follow that to where you're trying to lead them. As far as line is concerned, there's different kinds of lines. You have vertical lines, you have horizontal lines, you have slanted lines, and you have curved lines. Each of those lines, if you had all of those lines at exactly the same dimension, they would move the viewer at different speeds. You know, a lot of what I've learned in painting, and a lot of what I teach in painting is I found studying the Gestalt psychologists. The Gestalt psychologists were a group of psychologists that got together in Germany during the time of Freud to study human responses. One of the areas that they studied was visual response. When I look at a painting, how do I look at that painting? And they found and it's still going on, they're still doing studies, but what they found is that the brain, how the brain works is that when you look at a painting like this, you can't see the painting. All you do, the human mind and brain, it's amazing how it does this, takes little snapshots, takes snapshots very quickly and sends that information to the brain. The brain assembles it and puts it into one painting. So you really don't see the whole painting. That's why they found that depending on how far away from the painting you are, that you can only see about 17% of that particular painting. So my eye and brain takes a picture of that space right there. That's the center of interest. Then it takes other pictures. So what they found then in that movement is that I can move the viewer with vertical, horizontal, slanted, and curved lines. They found the fastest one, just a little test. Which is the fastest one? If they're all the same size, how would I look at a painting if I wanted the viewer to go very quickly from one area to another area?
A straight line.
It's vertical. Our human eye and brain works faster vertically than it does in any other direction. The slowest one is horizontal. So when you're doing a composition, you're doing a composition of, you're out on the beach in a hammock with a pina colada in your hands, and the waves are coming in, it's very calm, then I would try to use more horizontal lines. If I'm doing something I want to have a little bit more anxiety, I want to move faster, I want to create something that it's just chaotic, I use more vertical lines. So in the image I have here, the diagram, I'm just showing you how this particular artist, nice painting, whoever did it, goes to the center of interest, and you can see that he lined up the heads to create a curve. So I very slowly go to the right to this little donkey over here. Now, another thing about composition that you want to consider is that anytime, like in this case, you have this chunky furrow, whatever it is, it's leading you out of the composition. That's very dangerous because you don't want the viewer to leave your painting. They'll go buy somebody else's. So very astutely, he added these figures here. You see these three figures back here?
Yeah.
They're
got it.
stopping the viewer from going out. Perfect placement, very nicely done. From there, I go up to this rooftop, and then I've got several rooftops lined up to lead the viewer back to the other side of the composition. Then from there, this little tree here, very subtle things that make compositions work. My eye goes into the clouds, slowly goes over to the other side, and then travels back. So you want to create a loop in there that contains the viewer within the picture space. Very nicely done. Composition. Can see it a little bit better. Okay, next.
Stop share.
Questions, comments, complaints?
Yeah, if you have questions, put them in the chat.
No, I don't have a question. Thank you.
Thanks, Kuhn. Love that
Welcome.
series. Kuhn, when were you in Ethiopia?
Minimize there. This is 4. Is that the next one?
Okay.
Can you see it?
I
This is
think
Richard. This is Richard Lawrence.
we have number 4. Richard,
Hi, John.
nice painting.
Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Very good. Everything about this is good, except I think for one thing,
Everything is good. Except
and that's the center of interest. I don't know where to look. Everything is so interesting that I just keep jumping from one place to another. And that tends to make people kind of anxious because they don't know what to look at. So I'm looking at this, then I jump over here and look at that, which is very nice. Look at that up there, which is very nice. So to create a center of interest, most books that I've read have 4 or 5 different ways of creating a center of interest, and I've come up with 10. And I think because you don't find a lot of these in any other writings, I think they're all correct. So number 1 is contrast of values. So if you want to make something look more important, again, Gestalt psychologists find that we are attracted to high contrast. The darkest dark next to the lightest light will attract our attention. Second is detail. So the more detail, if you have a group photograph of 5 people in it, 4 of them wearing blue shirts and 1 wearing a plaid shirt, which one are you going to look at? The plaid shirt, because it has more detail. Number 3 is placement. Placement is near, but not in the center of the picture space. When I was a student, that was one of the first things I learned about composition when I was a student, is that you never place something exactly in the center of the picture space. And because I was just out of the service, I said, yes, sir, and did that for many, many years. When I started teaching, I would teach that to the students and they'd say, well, why not? And I had to find out why not. I can't teach and not have an answer for the students. So I did a lot of research and I found, not scientifically, but what I think is happening is that if you place it exactly in the center, you're creating a bullseye. It forces the viewer to just look at that one area, and then because they don't look at the rest of the picture space, you're wasting your time just painting that. The second thing is that it tends to break down the picture space too evenly.
Forces
So,
inward.
and that becomes a little bit boring. So you want to place it off center so that the picture space has a little bit more variety. The one caveat is that, again, all of these things are not absolute rules. They're just basic principles. If you look at Winslow Homer's work, a lot of his paintings, he put the center of interest in the center of the picture space. And he made the compositions work by varying the size of the spaces and the shapes of the spaces away and around the picture, the center. So again, it's not an absolute. He made it work and you can make it work. Number 4 is intensity. We're attracted to very intense colors. So if you want something to be more important, then you just make it a little bit more intense. Grayer colors don't attract your attention as much. Temperature, warmer colors tend to be more predominant, more accurate in creating a center of interest than cool colors. Size, naturally, the larger objects, the larger spaces within your picture space are going to attract more attention. Number 7 is uniqueness. Anytime you make something different, people are attracted to something different. The same example with the people with the blue shirts and the plaid shirt. Plaid shirt is unique. The one thing you have to remember about uniqueness is that you can lose the unity within the painting. If it's too much different than everything else, the viewer is going to find that disturbing. Number 8 is line, just something pointing to an area is going to attract viewers to that to make it the center of interest. Tangents, this one's a little bit more difficult to work with because it creates something like putting the center of interest in the center. A tangent simply means touching. As artists, there's only 3 things we can do. We have 2 objects, 2 people, 2 animals, whatever, a house and an animal. There's only 3 things that we can do with those 2 objects. We can keep them separated, we can have them overlap, or we can have them touching. If they are touching, they can be touching at one point, or they can touch at a line. So when they are touching and it focuses, if it's touching at a point, it'll focus attention at that point. If they're touching at a line, it's going to emphasize that particular line. The one caveat about tangent is that if you're not careful, it can change the shape of the object that you're trying to emphasize. Last is animation. Living things tend to be more attractive than dead things. So putting people and or animals within a composition makes that much more of a center of interest. So I did here, again, even though this is a real nice painting, it could be done in an overcast setting, so there wasn't a direct light hitting it. So I changed it, and you can see the pattern, and then I changed it to make it a center of interest. I just made it with a stronger light source, so I have more intense color within this area and a little bit more contrast in this area. So you're immediately drawn to that point and then throughout the rest of the picture space. And you can see how the pattern has changed just by lightening this up, giving this more contrast. It creates, I think, a better pattern. Okay, questions, comments, and complaints?
Thank you.
Go to the next one. Okay, stop share. Share, what's next? Number 5. Here's number 5.
This, a couple of these, Bob went through our, all the ones that we had done and picked a couple other ones to look at. So this may have been done a week ago or so. I think might be Tom's.
Yep, this one's mine.
Good.
You good?
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Tom. You read Carlson's guide?
What's that?
Have you read Carlson's guide to landscape painting?
I have, yes.
Yes. Referring to the article or the page you had on sky holes?
Yes, I love sky holes. I didn't go there much.
No. Well, when Carlson's talking about sky holes, usually you find in the openings in trees, so you can see
Oh, yeah.
through the tree mass to the sky. And if you look closely, there's a lot of Carlson's paintings online that you can look at, blow them up real hard, and you can see that because the sky hole is surrounded by darker values, it appears, artists were just painting illusions. It appears to be lighter than the actual sky. So what Carlson suggested, which I think is accurate, is you make them slightly darker in value so they look the same as the sky, not by the trees. And sky holes work in all situations just like that. So what you have here is actually a sky hole. This the dark that you have surrounding this lighter value makes it look too light, and it makes it come forward. You're losing a lot of depth in both of these areas.
Yeah.
First of all, the painting is excellent, very good.
Thank you.
I like it a lot. The one thing that I think is important to note, other than the sky holes in this painting, is the lack of center of interest. Now, when I was teaching, there was another teacher that we talked about art constantly, and he did not believe a painting had to have a center of interest. And I argued with him for 26 years. Never came to an agreement. Even though his paintings had centers of interest, he said you don't have to have one. I think you have to have one. So here you have a center of interest, over to the side of the painting. I think that should be the center of interest. And I just made it a little bit more intense to show that it's more interesting than the rest of it. All of the spaces you have here are very interesting, but I think you need one that's a little bit more interesting than, say, the trees over here.
Do you think it could be the shadow at the end of the bridge?
The cast shadow or the shadow?
No, the tree shadows beyond the bridge. Yeah.
That one?
Yeah, I started to put figures in there, but they're so small.
Right. Yeah, I think if that was maybe a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter in value, it wouldn't attract more attention. Yeah, I keep on going from here to here, jumping back. The other thing to note in this one is that these darks. Your darks are so dark that it kind of you're losing a little bit of shape and form in there. Now, when I blew this up, I saw a little bit of a change of value in some of these darks. That was good. But remember that any cast shadow should be darkest where it begins and get lighter as it goes away from the object casting a shadow. So this cast shadow you have here, it has basically the same edge from start to finish. I think that was a little bit softer there. It would be more realistic and create a little bit more movement. There we go. Made it a little bit bigger so you can see that. See that edge
Yeah.
there would be a little bit more buried.
Definitely.
Again, very, very nice painting.
I think maybe I started by kind of doing that noton like for value,
Yes.
and it simplifies everything, but then I left it simplified and it flattens it.
Yes. Yeah, it's good to do that. Yeah, I'm going to talk about one, actually, Nancy Mercer's painting, and we could talk about that flat pattern. So we'll save that till shortly.
Minimize that.
Okay, next one.
And then
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
share screen. Yes. Right? I think. Zip it.
Okay, here's the next one. Can we see this one?
I think that's Deb Popley's.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I picked this one to talk about the dreaded P word, perspective. You know, the most important thing in painting is drawing. Perspective is just another name for drawing. Because everything we see realistically, we see it in perspective. So if you get the perspective wrong, you're getting a drawing wrong. If you get the drawing wrong, you can't put in the correct values, can't put in the correct colors, and it just doesn't work. So when you look at the first thing you have to know about, I'll try to keep this brief. This is difficult when it comes to perspective, but the first thing you have to do, if you're painting plein air from a photograph, you have to find the eye level or horizon line. The horizon line is basically in line with your eyes. The whole principle of perspective was discovered a long time ago, and it's geometrically proven to be accurate. The problem that we have when we're painting out of doors is that we have to move our heads to see what we're trying to draw and paint. And the linear perspective, the basis for that is that we have to keep our head still. The eye level is directly level with your eyes. If you look up at a tall building, you're no longer looking at it in perspective. You're looking at it in a different perspective. So that's the difficult part. You have to look up to see what you're drawing and draw it as if you were looking straight ahead. So once you establish where that eye level is, then the number one thing, if you don't know anything about perspective, the one thing that you have to know absolutely is that all parallel lines must recede to a point, no matter what. There's only one exception to that rule. What's the exception? Who knows? This is on your test at the end of this. The only exception to that rule is 1 point perspective. When you're looking at something that is parallel to the picture plane, the picture plane is basically your canvas that you're working on or your paper that you're working on. If it is parallel to that, then the lines of that object, if it's say a box, are going to stay horizontal lines. They will not recede to a point. So that's the only exception. So all other lines have to recede to a point somewhere on the eye level. Now I diagram this to show you some of the points that you have.
Plus and minus. Do the plus and minus. A tangent.
Okay, can we see it a little bit larger there?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so you can see that anything parallel to the right side of these buildings here has to go to a right vanishing point. that vanishing point has to be on the eye level, period. The objects or planes that are parallel to the left side of these buildings, this one and this one, have to go to a point to the left. That's your left vanishing. So anything you have anywhere else in the composition that is parallel. If I had another building here and that building went way up here, the edge of that building would have to recede to the right vanishing point. So you can see that the angles would be much more severe on a taller object than a lower object. The only other adjustment to that is if the planes are inclined. So if it's an inclined plane, then you're going to have vanishing points that are not on the eye level. They will be at points above or below the eye level. And because we don't have 3 hours to discuss perspective, I think we'll leave it at there. You know, I understand perspective. I like it because it's absolute. You know, I know that if I draw things to vanishing point, it's going to look good. I don't like it because it makes the painting look too mechanical. So once you draw it accurately, then you don't want to make it that strict. You want to give it some softer edges, harder edges. But you have to know the mechanics before you do anything. Questions on that one?
So Bob, do you want to tell them that you have a book on perspective?
I have 3 books that I've written. You know, for years I wanted to write one book on everything I've found out about art from reading hundreds and hundreds of different books. Carlson's Guide, Richard Schmid's books, Edgar Payne, Winslow Homer, Sargent, and all of those different books I get certain hard facts that I can use when I paint. So I wanted to do one book and include all of that in one book. And I started that book and it got so big that I figured nobody's going to buy it, a 400-page book. So I broke it down into 3 books. So the first one I wrote was on perspective. The second one was just on watercolor painting. And the third one, which includes basically everything else, was drawing and painting. All 3 of those books you can get from my website.
And I will send a link out with the books to everyone, and I can post it on Facebook as well.
Yeah, if you order it from Amazon, if you order it from Amazon, they take about half of the profit. So if you have PayPal or something else, it would be to my advantage to buy it that way.
Okay.
If you can't find the book, go to the website, copy and paste the ISBN number, and they'll be able to find it.
I'll get it to him, Judy.
Okay.
Share screen. I think we did we do this one? No, wait. No. I guess this is the last one then, right? This was the first one, yeah.
That's Facebook? You have
No,
Facebook?
Don't want that one yet.
No, go back out again. Stop share.
I'm going out again.
I misled him.
We have
This one.
there you go. Nancy Mertz.
If I can find it. That's not it.
You have Nancy's up.
I'm getting it.
Got it.
I'm hunting.
It's there. There you go.
Good Bob hunting. Little humor in our day. Okay. You got it?
Yep. Looks good.
First
Thanks.
of all, you're putting me on a spot here. Nancy's paintings are excellent. She's a great artist, nationally known.
Internet.
her paintings. They're really, really good. So to critique one of her paintings is hard.
Have at it, Bob.
But I think we can learn from everything. So here, this is a perfect example of the difference between, let me see if I can say this differently. When I first started teaching at the academy, we had different categories that we had to teach. One was composition, one was technique, one was design, one was color. So when I started teaching that, I found out that the course that they had, which was developed many, many years ago, the difference between composition and design wasn't really defined. So I tried to separate them just so I could teach it a little bit better. So what I came up with when I taught subjects that were compositional, the definition that I came up with is composition is anything that is real. If you have real shape, real form, anything that you can see yourself in reality is a composition. Design is anything that is not real. So if you use flat value, it becomes a design. If you distort the drawing, shape or form, you distort the colors, it's not realistic and therefore it's a design. So how does a judge decide when they're judging a design against a composition, which one is better? And I think they have things in common that we can use to talk about the difference. So number one, I think in any painting, if it's composition or design, the most important thing is consistency. So if you had a painting and you have like this painting, which again, is excellent, and you have flat values like you have in the road here, you have these lines here, 1 and 2, and guess what they're not doing? They're not going to a vanishing point. So if that's the case, then they're not realistic. Makes it more of a design. You have these cast shadows here. And again, cast shadows in reality are always, always transparent. We can always see through them to what's underneath. So here, these cast shadows are very dark. Cast shadows here are very dark, and so on. So again, that makes it more of a design. As long as you're consistent, you make all of those cast shadows too dark, then it makes it work as a painting. If you look at the cast shadow here, that this bright blue space, that's really nice color there. You know, it's such a small area, but that cool, intense color next to this warm color here just makes the painting perfect. You know, I always look for those little accents that are good. So here again, everything works. It's all consistent. She didn't try to make something realistic and something more graphic, more flat. The only, if I can critique it,
Please do.
remember I talked about movement and talking about the corners of your picture space. Now, if you have these two cyclists leaving the picture space, that's creating, you know, all of these lines are leading me in this direction, and it could lead me out of the picture space. I think that the amount of detail you put in there in the two cyclists is enough to keep me in, but it's a very dangerous thing to do, and I think you did it very well. So that would be the only I have everything else. Now look at the shadow down here and the amount of detail in the brickwork here. Excellent. Very nice.
Thank you.
That's it. I'm sorry, Nancy, but that's all I can find wrong.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
Stop sharing. I think
Okay,
that was the last
I
one.
think that was the last one, so we can choose
Interesting.
if you want any other ones.
I think that-
You can start in on some of the Facebook ones if you'd like,
Yes.
and go to photos.
If there's any requests,
oh, the photos are up.
I can take those first or just start from the top and work down,
I'd like mine done.
whatever you
If,
prefer.
if I could make a request, just if there's one that illustrates the temperature of the light, something I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Temperature?
you-
Well, let me do Mary's first.
Which one is?
Where's your at?
That's
Point.
yep, right there.
That one?
Yep,
This one? That's it?
yep,
Okay, is it showing?
yep.
Okay. 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 Again, first impression. Again, first thing I always look at is drawing. There's not a lot of drawing here. So the first thing, your perspective looks good. So the curvature that you have in here is leading towards a vanishing point. So that looks good.
I had a good teacher.
Drawing wise, again, the first thing I look at is trees. For some reason, my students tend to think that all trees grow perfectly vertically, and they don't. Trees are nice. They're not like weeds. Weeds tend to kill other plants to grow. Trees are very nice, very social. They tend to grow away from each other. And when they do that, they tend to be not vertical. So when I look at two trees together, if they're moving, if you've drawn them so they're moving away from each other, it makes it more accurate. Same thing with these trees back here. None of them are perfectly vertical. So that's number one. Now here, the first thing I see here is this little water place you have here. What did I talk about when I talked about horizontal planes? Again, this is an illusion. It's flat, two-dimensional space. We're trying to make it look horizontal. To do that, it has to change from value from the foreground to the background about 15%. This is a little bit shorter, so it's probably going to be less than 15%. So you have it kind of backwards. You've got this intense blue color. Again, intense colors want to come forward. So, that's all the language that we have as artists. So you're telling me by making this more intense that it's closer to me. This is not as intense because you added white to it. It's lighter in value. White always makes it less intense. So you're telling me that this is farther away. I'm confused. As a viewer, I'm confused. So that should change around. Now here again, the same thing. You've got this intense blue back here. It's a real nice color, but that intensity wants it to come forward. You can, again, there's no absolutes. You've got this tree in front of it, so it's kind of stopping it from coming forward. That's all the tools we have as artists can be used. I remember when I was a student of Irving Shapiro, great watercolor artist. He was the director of the academy, hired me to teach there. He did a demonstration in class once where he put these warm, intense reds and oranges in the background. And I asked why he was doing that, and he said, because there are no rules. So he put some things in front of that warm, red, intense color to make it recede. So to create depth, we have color, intensity, temperature. Overlapping is the easiest way to show depth. So if you want to put an intense color back there and you still want to make it stay in the background, putting this tree in front of it makes it work. So did good over there. Darks. What the heck are these darks doing so dark? there's no air between me and the darks back there. Again, when we look through air, it's dirty blue color. So, you know, if I'm looking through 1 mile of air, it has to affect the colors. So that has to be lighter and grayer back there. Is that enough?
Sure. Whatever. This is great.
Yeah,
I like mine critiqued. This is Charlotte.
the color here is very nice also. Overall, it's a good painting. If you just corrected that pond and the darks there, I'd give it a B+.
All right. That's high praise from you, Bob. Thank you.
This is Sharon. I'd like mine critiqued too.
And this is Barbara Herring, and I'd like mine critiqued as well if you have time. Thank you.
And this is Charlotte Arnold. I like mine critiqued too.
Yeah, as I told Bob, there's nobody's on here that doesn't want to be critiqued.
True.
Okay.
Ditto with Ann.
Can you find one for me?
How do we get out of that? We did that.
Or can I just use these arrows to find
It's
it?
one of them.
Stop me when you see one.
Oh, you passed mine up.
I really like what Bob was, or what Tom was saying about doing something with the temperature, Bob.
That's mine, if you want to read. Oop.
So Bob, if there's one that really speaks to you about temperature.
Okay. I will continue to flip through here on this one. I'm thinking here. Give me a second. And searching.
Those are old ones. You need to go the other way. There you go.
We could talk this. I don't know if this would be a good example of temperature. No, I don't think so. It's too gray for that particular purpose.
Doing that when I was there.
We did that.
No. I didn't do that.
Well, we could try this one for temperature. Can everybody see that one? Not sure exactly what you want, but again, this particular painting, you know, again, I'll go through everything I've talked about. Number one, the sky is flat. If you want, the sky is only flat when it's totally overcast and it's grayer. It has to change from dark closer to you or in the foreground or at the top and lighter and grayer as it recedes and cooler. So that here we have a flat sky. What you're telling me, again, we're just telling stories as artists. What you're telling me is that it's kind of overcast, but because I've got so many clouds in here, it has to be a little bit clearer. So I'm not quite sure what you're trying to tell me when you do that. If I relate the light coming through the sky to the rest of the composition, again, you've got this side of the hill is light and this side of the hill is dark. So you're telling me that light is coming from the upper left, which would be correct, but I don't have a lighter value in the sky. So it has to be consistent. The water, again, has to be, it's a horizontal plane, first of all. So to get that to be horizontal, it has to go from darker in the foreground to lighter in the background. More intense and warmer to less intense and cooler within 15%. And that's going to make it look like a horizontal plane. Right now, because the value isn't changing, it looks like a vertical plane. There's no flatness to it. So that again, basic stuff. It's all basic.
think the photograph is compare with the photo at all.
Yeah, photograph shows a flat blue sky, cool.
You can see
Yeah,
it.
so what would I, given the photograph, what would I do in the picture? It's sort of,
Say again?
Even the
so
photograph.
given what the photograph looks like, which is sort of a very intense sort of blue sky and very bright sunlight. I mean, what would I do there to make those changes?
I would do a lot of color sketches first
Mhm.
to see exactly what you want to do. So if you wanted a warmer sky, when I use photographs for reference. I don't do a lot of plein air, and I take them into Photoshop and manipulate them. When for years I did sketches. I would do sketches in pencil to get the placement of the objects, to get the best balance between the negative and positive spaces. And then after that, I would do a color sketch. So if I wanted to do this with a warm sky, I would just do a lot of sketches just to make that warmer and adjust everything else to it. That's the difficulty of working from photographs. That's why plein air is better, because you don't have to make those adjustments.
Okay, thanks.
That answered your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm still looking for another one.
People were asking what your what program did you use to do your touch-ups in, your adjustments?
I used Photoshop to make all the adjustments. In Photoshop, you can change the values, the temperature. Before the computer, I would spend hours doing sketches, just changing things around. In Photoshop, I can do 10 in 5 minutes. I can change the values, the color. I can even take a lot of the paintings that I do in my studio are from photographs that I took, but I combine different photographs together. So I'll take a sky from one photograph and put it into another one to make the sky more dominant in the composition. But everything is Photoshop.
Did you do the no-tan in Photoshop as well?
Yes, there's a filter. Photoshop has filters that you can use, and the filter is called what?
I don't know.
I always forget the name of that filter.
But you can always change the, brighten contrast a bit.
Yeah, you can change contrast with the filter. If you have a phone, you can download. There's a program that does that for you on the phone called No Tanizer. It only costs about $2 or $3. So you can get it right on your phone.
No tanizer.
On the computer, Photoshop, which is kind of expensive. They have free downloads that you can get that are similar to Photoshop. I'm looking for temperature to answer that one question about
Gentleman's question.
About temperature.
That's mine. Charlotte.
Who was that?
That's Charlotte Arnold.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
We can talk about this one if you'd like.
Please. Help.
Looks good. First glance, again, always first impressions are the most important. Looks like it has good color, good shapes, good forms. Everything looks pretty good. I think it needs, it depends on who you want to listen to, me or that other teacher I was talking about. doesn't have a center of interest. So I think something somewhere should be, and again, you can get, if you just put more detail in an area here, more contrast, that can make that one area the center of interest. You know, the center,
Okay.
it should be something that most people are going to find interesting. You know, most people are going to find trees interesting if you do something with them. But if you have something like a rock and you're trying to make that a center of interest, it might be a problem. So I think if you had just a center of interest. Second is these clouds up here. What color are those clouds? Rule 42, never lose the identity of the local color. Local color of the cloud is what? It's white. So you have to first figure out what's your light source. You can't paint without knowing what your light source is. Is it a warm day? Here you have cumulus clouds. Cumulus clouds, as opposed to stratus and cirrus clouds, indicate that it is a warm, fairly clear day. You've got some moisture. Clouds basically are just water vapor that form around dirt and accumulate to make a cloud. The bottom of the clouds tend to be more dense. You know, it always amazed me when I started reading about clouds. You know, the average cumulus cloud weighs 2.5 tons. 2.5, and it's floating in the sky. How could that be? Science, nature is incredible. So you have these cumulus clouds, and they're white. Again, there's no white in nature. They have to be influenced by the light source. So here, down here, you have it's fairly warm. So I would make the clouds a little warmer in the light parts. And if it's a warm yellowish sun, then the shadow side of the clouds are going to be cooler and grayer. But if you gray them to just pure gray doesn't tell you anything about what you're trying to paint. Warm colors come forward, cool colors recede. So if you make it a cool gray, it's going to make it recede. If you make it a warm gray, it's going to come forward. So just by the temperature of the cloud in the shadow, you can tell the viewer where it's at in the relationship of depth. Whereas a gray, no temperature showing, it doesn't tell me where it's at in nature. So you never lose the identity of the local color. I didn't talk about edges. You have some edges back here that are a little bit too hard. You know, these trees, and I think Carlson talks about it in his book, whenever you have a tree like this one here, and it's pointed, and it's up against the sky, because it's pointed, the light behind it, it's the old good against evil. The light overpowers the darkness. So these darks should get much softer edged as they come up into the clouds. And again, what I learned about edges in art school, they told me that there are hard edges and soft edges. And hard edges, I think the rule that they taught us was no more than 1/3 of any edge should be hard. If you're trying to make something look realistic, no more than 1/3 of any edge should be hard. In my experience and studying art for over 50 years, is my rule is no more than 10% of any edge should be hard. Hard edges, what I tell my students is if you have an object and you run your hand along the edge of that object, if it causes blood, you can make it a hard edge. If it doesn't, then you have to make it a soft edge. So err on the side of too soft an edge rather than too hard of an edge. So some of these edges could be a little bit softer. The trees down here and the reflections, reflections are exactly the same as aerial perspective. Again, if you understand what you're seeing, it's really helpful. What you're looking at, you're looking through water at an object that's reflecting into it. So the water is actually in front of the object. And because water is more dense than air, the values have to change more rapidly. So again, just like aerial perspective, if you have a dark reflecting into the water, it will get lighter and lighter and lighter as it reflects downward. If you have a light in the water, reflecting into the water, it has to get a little bit darker and darker as it goes into the water. So all of these reflections are much too dark to make it look realistic. If you want it to be a design, then you have to make everything else too dark. You have to be consistent no matter what you're doing in a painting. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One question that we had, somebody wanted to know who that other teacher was. Might be.
Oh, should I name the other teacher? His name, he was a life drawing instructor there for many years, a really good guy.
Yep.
His name was Arvidas Elgaminus. Okay, looks good. First glance, nice. Water looks, see how horizontal this water is? That subtle change of value going back there. Very nicely done. Aerial perspective. See how gray the trees are back there? Softer edges. This edge up here is a little bit too hard. Nice soft edges over here. The trees are not vertical. That's good. You have a center of interest. The center of interest, again, there's no absolutes, but that should technically be about 17% of the picture space. So, you know, two right in here should be the center of interest. So making these values a little bit lighter would help. And again, shape and form. You have a highlight, light values to the shadow. The shadow on the tree is much, much too dark. Rule 42, never lose the identity. If it's a brown tree, it should have a brown shadow. If you have a red house, it should have a red shadow. Again, one caveat on that is when the Impressionists came along, they tended to use extremes as far as light and shadow are concerned. So if you had a warm light, they would go to the opposite, the complementary color, and make the shadow side with a yellow, they make it violet. In that case, they broke Rule 42. They lost the identity of the local color, and it worked for them. So again, there's no absolutes, but here, I think if this was a brown shadow, it would be much better in relationship to everything else that you did. And the other thing is that's missing is reflected light. Again, you will always have light reflecting and hit. In this case, water is going to reflect a lot of light. So not only light, but color. So your reflected light in here is going to reflect into the shadow side and be lighter and bluer. Reflected light up here is going to reflect more of the sky color, and that's also going to be bluer too. Okay, then you have some cast shadows. This cast shadow from this tree going across the water is going from darker to slightly lighter. So that cast shadow, you can actually have cast shadows on water. It's good. The cast shadow here, much too dark. Even though it's closer and should be darker, it's much too dark, and it should lighten up and then disappear when it hits the moving water over here. This tree branch coming in here, this is this is one of the things that I don't like personally. There's no rules that gather. Anytime you have an object coming from outside of your picture space into the picture space, it gives you more depth, but it looks too artificial to me. That's just a personal thing that I have. So I generally try to avoid anything that's outside of the picture space coming into the picture space. But it's not technically wrong. Okay. Next.
Thank you.
You go toward your left,
To the left.
to the left, to the left.
The left.
And there's one we want to make sure we get, which we were on before. Keep going. There we are. Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
That one. Okay. Again, nice. Excuse me. Nice painting. I think overall it looks good. Nice soft edges in the background. Water looks flat and horizontal because it's changing from dark to light, so it makes it look horizontal. This part I don't understand. You know, these green trees up in the corner, if they're reflecting into here, they should same color. If this is maybe algae on the lake or something, it could be a different color. But you know, if it was something different, then you're losing unity here. So I would make this a little greener to connect it more with the greens that you have back here. The other thing are these rocks in the foreground. You have a light side and a shadow side on all of these rocks. Well, these two, in the lights that you have, again, the first thing you have to decide when you're painting anything is what is the local color. The local color is the color of the object without influence of direct light. So if it's a red object, then it's going to stay red. So the light side should be a reddish color, and it should be a reddish color also. So here, because you have two lights on these two different rocks, same color, it tells me that these two rocks are the same kind of rocks. So they should be the same kind of color, and they vary a little bit too much to be. Okay. What else we got here? That's about it. Everything else looks really good.
So Bob, can I ask a question? So when you were talking about the shadows from the green trees and that they should be the same color, and then the reflection of that should be the same color. And then you were talking before that it would go, you're changing the values as it would come toward us.
It's not coming towards us. Coming towards us would be a cast shadow. Reflections are always down. You know, take an object, put it on a mirror, and the reflection goes straight down into the mirror. So these objects, if they're reflecting into the water, goes straight down. This one is kind of angled, so it's going to angle in the opposite direction. So a vertical will go straight down. If it's angled like this one tree here, it will be the opposite angle. Science. Listen to the science. Angle of reflection, angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. Did that answer your question?
Yes. I also wondered about the value change in how much value change.
Well, again, you know, art is hard. You know, technically for this area, whatever it is, if you want that to be a flat horizontal plane, then I talked about the value change. But here, it doesn't change in value, so it doesn't look like a flat plane. However, it changes in temperature. This part is warmer, and warmer colors come forward. This part back here is cooler, so that recedes. So instead of changing the value, you
Right.
change the temperature to achieve the same thing. So that's what makes artists unique, is which, there's not rules, there's principles. Which principle do you use to tell what you want to tell in your painting? So here, instead of value change, you decided to use temperature change to solve the same problem, which is good. Did I answer that question about the temperature color from that one person? I don't like to leave questions unanswered.
That was Tom Dilly. I think you must have.
Okay. See, that's what happens when you don't answer questions.
Actually, I think you can go the other way.
The other way.
That's one that wanted to be, Barbara's wanted to be.
That was, yeah, oh, I didn't unmute fast enough, sorry.
So Bob, the other way, I'm sorry, back to the one with the bicycle under the,
bicycle.
There you go.
Okay, now, perspective looks really good. This is 1 point perspective. So again, this plane of this building is parallel to your drawing surface, the picture plane, so it stays horizontal. So you have 1 point, all of these lines going to 1 point. So your perspective and the cast shadows from those objects are doing the same thing. They're going back into the distance. You have a center of interest. So all of those are good. This, here again, is another example of this flat horizontal plane. You did not change the value to make it look horizontal, but because of the cast shadows going to a vanishing point, it makes them look horizontal. So there's another solution to the same problem. So that's good. You don't have to change values if you use perspective. Perspective is one of the best tools that we have as artists to create depth and form. What else can I say? The only other problem that I see would be the colors. You have these intense colors on this vertical surface here, and then you've got these intense colors on the bottom of these beams, and they shouldn't be the same intensity. With your light coming from above, these bottom parts of the beams are should be a little bit darker or lighter than this vertical surface here. So they need to change a little bit so they're not the same intensity.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
There's one, if you wanted to do that one, the still life.
The still life. That's still life, yeah.
We know it's not plein air, but we're going to allow it.
You're going to allow it. Okay. Again, I talked a little bit about edges. Most artists will tell you that to paint flowers realistically is very difficult, and that's because of the edges. Flowers, the petals of flowers are translucent. They allow some light to come through. So if you look at one petal, you're actually seeing some of the background color coming through that. So to keep the shape and form of the flowers have definite shapes and forms. So that's important to get those edges correct. But if you make them too soft, you lose the shape and form. So that, you know, again, that's why flowers are very difficult, because of the edges. So all of the edges you have here are fairly soft, which is good. The edges here you have are fairly soft, but they're not allowing some of that light to come through. So some of that green behind there should influence the external edges of the flowers. Movement-wise, remember I talked about corners? You don't want the viewer to leave your painting. So these two spikes of leaves leading me to the corner, they're telling me that I want to get out of here. So again, just making them, you can leave them in the same position, but if they had softer edges, your eye would pass through them. Instead of pointing out, it's going to help keep the viewer in the composition. The other thing is color. To make, you know, this is the biggest object, so you're using size to create a center of interest, but you have the same color in other parts of in other flowers, which tends to make my eye jump back and forth. So if this were either a little more intense or these were a little bit grayer, it would stop me from jumping back and forth. Well, here again, you've got another flower leading me to the corner, which I don't like. And then we've got these leading me to a corner. Watch your corners.
Excellent.
Which way you want me to go?
To the left.
To the left.
We haven't done Muriel's. You can do Ray's. These are all good ones to do. Yeah.
These?
Yep. That's good.
Okay. Yeah, again, this is nice. Nice composition for the most part. You've got a darker sky up here, lighter down here in the clouds. Clouds are basically a cool color, so you're telling me that it's a cool light source. If it's a cool light source, then how come these highlights on these hay bales are warmer? So they should be cooler. All of these highlights on the bales should be a little bit cooler to be consistent with the light source. You've got a cool on here, which is good. So all of that is good. The only comment I can make on this, other than that temperature change, is all these hay bales. They're all over the place. Everything that you generally paint, you want to try to group them together to create masses rather than have individual objects. So if you have individual hay bales, your eye tends to jump from one to the other, and that jumpiness tends to psychologically make, again, it's all the Gestalt psychologist again, make the viewer a little bit edgy when they look at your painting. So, you know, if you're painting plein air and you want to paint just the way it is out there, that's fine, but don't tell me it's a good composition. So I would have taken some of these bales and moved them. Again, artists can do anything. So if I took, say, this one here and moved it over to the left, move this one to create a group of 3 here, your eye would follow these bales and move into this group and slow down because it's a bigger group, and then continue. So just moving those 2 bales over together, I think would help movement and consistency within the painting. Okay.
You know,
So much.
Thank you.
Bob, there's one that is near the end that she's never been critiqued, but also as a watercolor. And so go to the left, and we want to go to Shefali.
Folly, I know that name.
Yeah, I bet you do.
How you doing? Are you still there?
Shefali, you still here? But let's get hers done because we missed hers as well before.
Okay.
There's another one that's a watercolor. I think the fact that we don't do too many watercolors would be a useful thing to do. There we go.
That one?
Yep.
You don't do watercolors.
There,
the perfect medium for painting outside. It's quick, fast. As the light changes, you don't have to worry about that. Okay, in watercolor, the most important thing about watercolor is layering. When you put down a layer of paint with water, it eventually dries and forms a flat area. You can then put another layer over that and create another layer. Usually, depending on the paper that you're using, you can get 3, sometimes 4 different layers of paint. And the importance of that is that when light goes through each layer, it refracts, it bends, and then it hits the bottom of the paper and reflects back out and refracts again, causing the light to vibrate. The vibration of light is what makes watercolor look so intense. You know, oil painters can't do that. Only watercolor painters can do that. So that's the first quality that you have to think about when you're painting in watercolor. So all of these layers that you put on here, if you put them down without disturbing, that's the problem with watercolor. If you paint too slowly or put too many brush strokes down, you're going to disturb the layer that you put down, and it's not going to lay flat. If it doesn't lay flat, the light going through, instead of reflecting at the same angle, reflects at different angles and makes the color look gray and muddy and disgusting looking. So in watercolor, you have to paint very deliberately so you don't disturb those layers that you put on here. So all the colors look pretty good here as far as the transparency is concerned. Again, center of interest. You have this perspective leading me into the background here. You know, I follow that, and I'm very disappointed because you're telling me artistically that you want me to go here, but there's nothing there for me to look at. So I would have made this a little bit less important and focused on something either on this side or this side to make it more important. So I didn't go down this alley to nowhere. The other thing is, is these windows are all too much the same. If you make them the same, again, your eye's going to jump back and forth because they're so similar to one another, and that's going to create bad eye movement. So just a little more variation in the windows, a better center of interest would make that a better painting.
So go a little bit to the right now. There's 2 more watercolor. Let's just look at those given your
that one?
Maybe another. There's one.
That's a watercolor?
Yep.
Okay. as far as watercolor is concerned, as far as the application of the paint is good. All of your color, and that's the first thing I think most people have to learn about watercolor is that it's not oil paint. You can't go brushing back and forth and lifting and changing things and still keep it transparent. You have to put down a layer, let it form a layer, and then put another layer on top of that. So too much brushing causes muddy looking color. So the color is very good. Again, it doesn't have a center of interest. Where do you want me to look? My first glance at this, I look first of all here to these. Again, we're attracted to high contrast. So I look at this contrast and look at that contrast, and I jump back and forth. Then I look at these colors, and because they're so similar, my eye tends to jump back and forth on those. So you have
It's 2 o'clock.
You have to change those so your eye doesn't jump. You know, if this was more intense, this a little bit less intense and less intense, then I would follow that more gradually. Same thing with the contrast. If they had less contrast, I would move from one and then slowly move to the other one. So just too much the same contrast and the same color. The application of the paint is good.
Great.
Watch out for these lights and darks. Even though it's a birch tree, if you have light, you have color. Light, natural light is all colors. So if you have a warm light, then the lights that you paint are going to be warmer. If it's a cool light, the whites are going to be cool lights. Anytime you make something white, you're not telling me anything. You're not telling me what color the light source is. And in transparent watercolor, for some reason, it's the only medium that white in your painting is acceptable. If you painted a pure white in an oil painting, that is considered not good. But in watercolor, it is good. So if you have areas that you want to leave white for some reason, it's not absolutely wrong, but it would be better if you gave it some temperature change. Okay.
So we hit the 2 o'clock, that 30-minute mark. Do you want to pick one more and then we'll close out?
Okay.
This one, Lori's, or the Nocturne, either of those, I think, would be something a little different than what you've done.
Okay, the Nocturne, the night. How much do you know about night vision? Night vision. We have two, again, I don't want to get too technical, but to explain it, we have two kinds of receptors in our eyes, rods and cones. One of them sees in the light and the other one, I always get them confused, but one sees in the darkness. The first color that disappears when we have absence of light is the color red. So at night, if you had a person with a red shirt on, we wouldn't see it. It would be black. So here you have night, but then you have artificial lights. So the artificial lights are shining on this red building so we can see the red of the buildings, which is very accurate. So that's very good. That artificial light is also hitting the sidewalks here, which makes it warmer. So that's good also. The edges are very good also. The lights, the whites that you have in here are good. So overall, it's a good painting. I don't see, you know, other than the darker darks at the bottom, I think are a little bit too dark. You wanted to keep your darkest darks closer to the center of interest. But other than that, I can't say anything.
That's great.
Good painting.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Okay, is Scott still on the line? I want to say goodbye to Scott.
Yeah, Scott, we got to unmute you, Scott.
Hey, I'm still here. Yeah, great job.
Good talking
very-
a little bit anyway.
Very, very inspiring.
Good. And keep painting. Your paintings are excellent.
Thanks, Mr. Krajecki. I appreciate it.
I
I
think
hope you come back and do this again sometime.
I might, if Mary is a good salesperson.
Yeah, we'll try to twist your arm.
It's taken me like 3 years, 4 years.
But the one thing I want to mention in teaching, I taught first-year students, and from the first year, they went on to either oil painting or watercolor or something else. And when they become successful, they usually give credit to their oil painting instructor, watercolor instructor. Scott's one of the only ones that give me a heads up. So thank you for that.
Hey, I wouldn't be where I am today without you.
Glad to hear that.
Well,
Yeah,
Bob,
absolutely.
thank you so much for all this time, for taking the time to put all these paintings into Photoshop and adjusting them. That was incredibly helpful, for taking the time to
Yeah.
do some work. It was very valuable for all of this, and people are asking that you might do this again, so we'll talk with you. Everybody, as you're thinking about putting in next week's, please make sure you put in what the medium is, what the size is, and the location. It's helpful for us to just see what it is. Also with that, I'll say goodbye to everybody. So thank you very much, Bob and Judy.
One last word for me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
So
Bye.
much, Bob.
Be safe.
Yeah, we gotta go buy. We're gonna go buy your book too.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
going
you
on
so
there right
much.
now.
Yeah, don't sell out.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, see you later, guys.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much.
Keep painting.
All right. Bye bye.
Thanks, Mary.